Alrighty, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. So we are starting with chapter 18 here, the New South and the New West. What do we mean by that? Basically, what's happening to the South and the West after the Civil War. So we will start with our textbook friend.
In the years after the Civil War, a small but vocal group of business leaders and journalists across the South began promoting what they called the ideal of a new South, a South quite different from that had dominated the early 19th century. In particular, they believed that the South needed to become more like the North, with a diversified economy, with thriving commercial cities, and improved race relations. Henry Grady, a prominent Atlanta newspaper editor, led this so-called New South movement. He repeatedly urged the South not to go back to its old ways of doing things and also to abandon the old planter elite that dominated the political and social landscape in the South before the Civil War. And over the years, the South did develop textile mills, tobacco plants and cigarette factories, and a whole series of coal mines and steel mills. In the end, however, the New South was never realized. For all of its efforts, for all of the appeal of the concept of the New South, the South remained pretty much what it had been. The most rural area of the nation, the least developed, the least urban, and the poorest. Those issues would continue to plague the region well into the 20th century.
All right, the New South. So let's talk about it a little bit more. So after the Civil War, the South is in shambles. That's where a majority of the fighting has occurred. It's the one that is having to take on the most changes. As far as having the Civil War change its way of life. I'm terribly sorry. I was eating popcorn and I got a kernel stuck in my teeth. Okay, I'm all better now. All right. So its political, social, and economic systems are just broken. Everything is just a mess. So it needs a new vision, and this is provided by Henry Grady, who is the editor of the Atlanta Constitution. He illustrated a new South, in quotes, mind you, a perfect democracy of farms and industries. During the Civil War, the South suffered from a lack of manufacturing centers. This changes in the New South with factories and textile mills springing up in record numbers before the end of the century. Although it fosters growth in manufacturing, agricultural still reigns and cotton is still king. The reconstruction of the South and its rail lines improved the shipping of crops to market and the introduction of the refrigerated rail car. Woo woo! This allows crops to ship further without spoiling. The old plantation system gave way to the tenant farmer or sharecropper. Farmers worked land they did not own and traded a set percentage of their annual yield for the right to work the field the next season. Cash in the South was lacking, so credit was really the only way tenant farmers survived. We all know what credit is. Generally, it just means you can't afford to buy it. So that is going to eventually cause some problems. All right. So this is sharecropping and tenancy, 1880 to 1900. In Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, over 55% of all farmers are sharecroppers by 1900. That is an increase, let's see, of over 10% between 1880 and 1900. You have 40 to 45% in the areas that kind of border that: Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, North Carolina. 20 to 39% more into the Midwest and California, oddly enough. And then under 20% are likely not much at all in all the brown states there. So, okay, these are sharecroppers painstakingly picking cotton. It says free slaves, in quotes. So basically, they're freed. What do we do now? Plantations are still there. They still need people to do the work. And so they hire all the former slaves. So a lot of times the free black men were working in the same fields they were working in before the war. They were just getting a salary instead. The problem is their salary is not enough to feed them and house them and all that kind of stuff. So it's not really helping them out all that much. All right, so the tenant farming system results in significant damage to the South. Without ownership of the land, tenant farmers planted high-yield crops in high demand. This drained the land of nutrients vital for future seasons. In addition, the increased use of fertilizers put the land at greater risk. When the land was depleted, tenant farmers moved on to another field. So you have your sharecroppers and you have your tenant farmers. So again, not really helping the system. Politics in the South after the Civil War, much the same as before. You have a small group of Democrats known as Redeemers who were in charge, and they gave themselves credit for saving the South from the Yankee carpetbaggers, thus redeeming the South. Yeah, anyway. All right, so a wave of violent anti-African American sentiment ran rampant in the 1890s South. Many viewed the education of African Americans as a danger to the social order and felt it must be stopped to keep them in their place. Nice, huh? New laws were enacted to prevent blacks from achieving their constitutional rights. These were known as, anybody? Yes, Jim Crow laws, mandating the separation of races in public places. These effectively negated the rights African Americans had earned under Reconstruction constitutions. So yeah, a lot of people tried to keep African Americans from getting their rights. 1883, the Supreme Court rules that the 14th Amendment applies only to cases in which the state infringed upon the rights of African Americans. Therefore, it was perfectly legal when an individual did so. 1896, you get the Supreme Court case Plessy versus Ferguson. And I will tell you right now, honestly, it does not matter what the case is about. That's not really why it's important. On a side note, it's about sitting in the same car on the train in Louisiana. They go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court actually rules that segregation is legal, so long as both races receive the same quality of accommodations or services. But as we all know, since we lived through, well, we didn't live through it, but we studied the history, separate and equal or not, they don't go together. Generally, separate means unequal. In Wilmington, North Carolina, African Americans composed the majority of the 20,000 city residents. In 1894 and 96, they joined with Republicans and Populists to choose their own slate of elected officials, a step the minority white Democrats found unacceptable. On November 10, 1898, more than 2,000 white men and boys rampaged through the town, destroying African American-owned businesses and killing as many as 100 African Americans. They then forced the elected officials out of office and appointed their own slate of officers. African Americans responded in different ways. Some left the South, but others remained and adopted a solitary lifestyle to keep from being noticed. Yeah, things aren't good there. All right. You have an outspoken African American activist. Her name is Ida B. Wells. I'll show you her picture in a second. She comes to public attention when she was denied a seat on a railroad car due to her race. She filed suit and won, but that was overturned on appeal to the Tennessee Supreme Court. From this event, she found her life's calling and helped found the NAACP in 1909. Booker T. Washington was the foremost black educator in the 1890s. He believed that his race should first achieve economic stability that would ultimately provide for the advancement of their social status. He was opposed by W.B. Du Bois, who worked for immediate acceptance of an equal status of Africans with their Anglo neighbors. White people liked Booker T. Washington a lot. Not so fond of W.B. Du Bois. All right, this is our friend Ida B. Wells. She raised 4 children, and during that time, she sustained her commitment to ending racial and gender discrimination. And likely this is one of the few photographs she ever took, which is why you see it everywhere. This is Booker T. Washington. He's the founder of the Tuskegee Institute. So yes, that is where the Tuskegee Airmen come from a group during World War II from Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. Like I said, he white men liked him because he really thought that black people needed to earn their place. This is W.E.B. Du Bois. He's a fierce advocate for black education. All right. Between 1870 and 1900, Americans settled more land in the United States than had been occupied before the Civil War. Because where are we going? Westward ho, friends. In the Great Plains, farmers found fertile soil, and in the Southwest, the Great American Desert barred it passage to the California coast. Settlers comprised Chinese, African Americans, Mexicans, European immigrants, and Anglo-Americans, all looking for a new life, a better life, an amazingly good life. After the Civil War, thousands of former slaves migrated west to seek new opportunities in untamed land. These freedmen were known as exodusters because they made their exodus from the South. This migration died out in the 1880s, as many exodusters were unprepared for their harsh living conditions of the plains. To employ these out-of-work farmers, the Army created 2 colored cavalry units in the West, known as the Buffalo Soldiers. There is a Buffalo Soldier Museum here in Houston. Maybe if we're lucky, I can figure out how for us to go. But the Buffalo Soldier Museum. You have, let's see, this is Nicodemus, Kansas. This is a colony founded by Southern blacks in the 1860s. I think that's a man standing on that roof. He said, they're going to see me in this picture. I'm going to stand up here. Okay, sorry. Enough of the commentary. Moving on. All right, the gold rush of 1849 establishes a pattern in the search for precious minerals. Gold or another valuable mineral would be discovered. A rush of prospectors would flock to the area. Business would follow to provide the needs of these migrants, and all would flock to a newer find when the mine panned out. So, those Old West ghost towns, this is where they come from. In the late 19th century, individual miners were replaced by large companies using equipment from the Industrial Revolution. High-pressure water cannons scoured the land of topsoil, and deep shaft mines drilled caverns into the earth to search for ore. Okay, the New West. So, that is basically just telling you what kind of land there is. All right, moving on. More about the New West. So we have range wars. So you have a lot of conflicting claims of land and water boundaries, along with ethnic prejudices that triggered range wars, violent disputes between ranchers and farmers. So this would happen a lot. The Homestead Act of 1862 opened for cultivation the last portion of the Great Plains. This land was arid and not easily cultivated. At the turn of the century, progressives pushed for water rights and dams to assist farmers in that area. They had a tough time. With the near extinction of the buffalo came the rise of the cattle drive. The terminus for a cattle drive was whichever rail line was closest. As railways continued to extend west, the destinations of the cattle drives changed. As farmers continued to settle the plains, they began to mark their land with a new invention. Yes, my friends, barbed wire. Several hard winters and a period of drought led to the end of cattle drives, and the open range gave way to the closed because everybody is blocking off their land. The cowboy era. So cowboys herd cattle near Cimarron, Colorado, 1905. There are still cowboys. There are still cattle ranches. They just don't drive their cattle to market over hundreds of miles. All right, so pioneer women. Women in the West faced the same societal constraints as in the East. However, many women who became widowed in the West assumed control of their land and obtained independence they would not have been allowed back home. Back home being the East. All right. As the line of the frontier moved further west, Native Americans who had been forced west by treaties and congressional decrees once again found Anglo settlers encroaching on land that had been promised to them. Unwilling to move again, they attacked the immigrants as they passed through or attempted to settle their land. Perhaps the best known of the Indian Wars involved Lieutenant Colonel George Custer. Yes, we've heard of Custer. Custer's last stand. Miners had been encroaching on the Black Hills of the Dakota Territory in search of gold, violating the Black Hills Reservation of the Sioux. Custer and his detachment of 210 soldiers moved against a Sioux encampment only to find themselves surrounded by more than 2,500 warriors. This is really the last time that the Sioux win anything, bless their hearts. It is sad. You can see the different areas for the Native Americans. The Sioux and the Northern Cheyenne, they're between the Dakota Territories and it's Minnesota. No, that's not Minnesota. That is Montana. Yeah, Montana and the Dakotas. Sorry, one day I'll learn to read them out, or I'll remember what states. Anyway, this is a painting of the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876. It is by Amos Badhart Bull, who's an Oglala Sioux. All right. The near extinction of the buffalo also leads to the decline of Native American resistance to white settlement. Indians used every part of the buffalo in some manner, relying on them for sustenance. Demand for buffalo skins following the Civil War caused a dramatic increase in their slaughter. A buffalo hunter killed an average 100 a day, taking only the skin. This widespread slaughter, along with the increase in forage with horses, cattle, and sheep, greatly reduced the number of buffalo in the South. Reformers attempted to Americanize the remaining Indians through a series of laws granting land to any native who would cultivate it. This is called the Dawes Act. With the Dawes Act, they basically took the land and they kind of did the same thing as they had done with the Homestead Act in 1862, where you get 120 acres and you have to live on the land in a single-family home, farm the land, and then after 5 years you own the land. The problem is Indians are not solitary people. They live in family groups. They live in large groups. And so this did not really work with the Indians. All it ended up working for was the American government, who took all that land. All right, this is Langtree, Texas in 1900. Judge Roy Bean's courthouse and the saloon. One and the same. Sometimes I think when you go to court, you might need a saloon. All right. The end of the frontier. So in 1890, the Census Office could no longer find an area that qualified as a frontier line. Previously, it was defined as an area where fewer than 2 people per square mile resided. By 1890, the frontier is gone. We have settled everything from Atlantic to Pacific Oceans, from coast to coast. And although it's an exciting growing time in our country, it's also, there's a lot of tragedy that goes along with it, especially with the Native Americans. I am going to request that if you missed class and you are watching this because you missed class, I'm going to send a link to a TED Talk called by a man named Aaron Huey. And so I want you to watch that link in that TED Talk. He talks a lot about the relationship between the United States government and the Lakota Sioux Indian. And he goes through all the history of it, and I think it's a fantastic bit of information. So we will have watched that in class. So again, if you missed class, please look for the link for the TED Talk for Aaron Huey. All right, have a wonderful afternoon, morning, afternoon, or evening, and I will see you soon.